So, after Chelsea beat AC Milan 3-0, Xabi Alonso has been back at it again with the quote. This one being that Chelsea and his team should look like a movie. And we're going to talk about this quote today and sort of work our way through, as we've done in other videos, breaking down how the game looked from a tactical perspective and the ideas that Xabi Alonso is trying to implement. Now, the quote here saying the principles are the same, but the movements can change. We need to be unpredictable. We want to be flexible and have threat. The system is just a picture. You need to move, rotate, and create dynamics. That's when the picture becomes a movie. And this is something we spoke about in the last video in terms of how different shapes and how we can sort of merge between different shapes due to certain players giving you flexibility and tactical flexibility, but also certain players being versatile enough that they can play multiple positions. Someone like Palestra, somebody like João Pedro, who can play as one of the 10s, he can play as a striker, Cole and the movement he can make. You've then got the likes of Kenda, you've got Neto, you've got Esteval, you've got Nicholas Jackson, who we'll talk about a little bit. You've got Jarell Hatto, Reece James, those types of profiles. There's probably some I haven't even mentioned. Morgan Rogers is another big one. And the idea is so that you can shift between these different shapes, whether it be starting in a 4-2-3-1 or starting in a 3-4-3. Again, I've spoken about it before. That rarely matters. It's more about which profiles you can get on the pitch together and how you want to move between different shapes in terms of the rotations that you're making. And that can, of course, be determined by the players that you're starting on the pitch together and who's comfortable in what area of the pitch. Now, this was kind of the idea in this game. We did technically, you could say that we started for the first time in that sort of 3-4-3. João Pedro in that sort of left pocket, Palmer in that right pocket, Welbeck as that striker. You could also frame it in a different way if you wanted to say that it was more sort of like this, where Palmer was the 10, and it was sort of a 3-4-1-2, with Pedro and Welbeck as split strikers. But I'd say the way that Pedro was sort of slightly left-sided, and Palmer, whilst having the freedom to go anywhere, would sort of come into these positions on this right side, as you can see in this position here. I'd say that you could probably call it that sort of 3-4-3/3-4-2-1. Now, what's easy about this is it's very easy to sort of shift into that 3-2 shape, and at the base it's very easy to do. You've got Wesley Fofana as that central centre-back, Joshua Chempong, who can play really well in that sort of wide right centre-back position, whether that be starting as a right-back and coming inside, or starting as that right centre-back overall. And we'll talk about it later, because what it does really, really nicely is it means if you want to shift into a temporary back four in the build-up, you can form these 3-2 shapes, but what we often do as well is maybe drop one of these midfielders in to create this sort of 4-1, where Palestra will then push forward, and it almost creates this sort of 4-1-5, if you will, with the build-up. And that's something that someone like Joshua Chempong gives you as well, playing as this right centre-back, is because he's so comfortable in the right-back, those nominal right-back areas, is he allows you to shift between those two different shapes. So that's really something interesting to think about. But again, you've got Lavia and Caicedo, both of whom are comfortable dropping into those positions between if they need to, but can also play as that double pivot. And I really actually enjoyed the game between those two. I think Lavia, that's one of the best games I've seen him play in a long time. Now, yes, it was, of course, him playing 90 minutes, which was huge in itself. But there was lots of really nice connections between the two, noticing when to slow the game down and control that tempo, which is something that's really important, in my opinion, with the way that Xabi wants to play, and making sure that you don't end up in really chaotic game states, as we kind of did in those first few friendlies of the preseason. Caicedo coming back has massively helped, and I think Lavia looks really good in this system in terms of protection behind him, and a little bit more solidity in terms of the rotations not really happening too much behind him, with somebody offering a really late support run. So he knows that he's the one that can be really aggressive in this position, in this sort of midfield with Caicedo, so that was really nice to see. Then, like I say, you have Cole in this position. Now, he can find himself literally in the centre, which there may even be a few examples of that in here. But I really like the positioning of Cole, where he can drop in and be part of this combination between Lavia and Caicedo, similar to the way that Wirtz would come and get joining in with Xhaka and Palacios, or Xhaka and Andrich, and I'm probably forgetting somebody, but the Bayer Leverkusen pivot. The way that Wirtz would come and join in to connect play and almost create a 3-3 at times, if you sort of connect this line here. And then you've sort of got the 3-3-4, which is something we saw a little bit under Maresca as well. And I think it suits Palmer's game in terms of being a passer, being the one to drop in and find progressive routes, especially now that when he gets on the ball in these areas where he can sort of get on the half turn and access, he's going to have Palestra ahead of him. He's going to have Pedro who will make those runs. He's going to have Welbeck, or again, this could be Jackson, who we'll speak about later, different options, Esteval, and then you've got someone like Neto or, again, Kenda in these positions. 4 players that can make those runs ahead of the ball for Cole to be that primary guy getting on the ball and sort of playing those deep passes, which I think really suits his game. Now, out of possession, this is where the system, for me, is the biggest difference when you're playing a 4 and a 5. And it still doesn't mean that you have to be, again, playing with an out-and-out back 5 with 5 defenders, because as you can see in this game, we did have Neto, but what it means is that you can play this sort of 5-2-3 block, and again, I think that this protects someone like Lavia much better, and it allows you to jump onto players in the centre of the pitch really, really easily and trap on the sides, and I think that this was one of the biggest strengths of Xabi Alonso's Leverkusen, is you'd almost have this front three who are looking to block off access. They've got their references ahead of them if they need to jump out in terms of here, 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 but they are just looking to try and stop that access into this pivot or into the centre of the pitch in here. And this then allows Lavia and Caicedo to go between a more zonal position between the lines. But if they think that ball's going to go through and the gaps appear between Pedro Palma and Welbeck, or whoever it may be, Lavia has then got his reference ready to jump onto, as has Caicedo. And then you've got a wide centre-back who can step out as well, someone like Jorel Hato, to protect those central areas. You've then got the wing-backs who can attach to, in this case, it was the opposition wing-backs, but in another case, it could be the opposition full-backs. Maybe only one jumps up and one stays more passive. Again, these are defensive details that come when it comes to playing that sort of 5-2-3. But again, you can see it here. You've got Joshua Chempong who's jumping up. You've got Neto who's then ready to follow that right-sided winger, or the left-sided winger, for example. You've got Fofana deeper. You've got Hato ready to jump out. You've got Palestra with his man-marking job. And then you've got Caicedo and Lavia in the middle. Again, they're ready to jump if they need to, but also ready to retreat and help in terms of defensively so that you don't get left out with a 5v5 in lots of different scenarios. And I think that we did just look really, really nice off the ball in this system. I think that it suits a lot of the players. Like, I mean, Hato, Fofana and Chempong can all jump out aggressively, so it really, really suits their game. Palestra and Neto have slightly less in terms of defensive responsibility because there is 5 across the back line. So in terms of getting sort of roasted 1v1, it gives them nice cover with a Chempong and Hato in those sort of inside channels as well. And it means that Lavia, like I say, is a little bit more protected, which for all of the people that want someone like Adam Wharton or even Enzo Fernandez to play in this role, this would be the system that I would trust it in. In a back 4, Adam Wharton would scare me, as would Fernandez, as we spoke about. Again, depending on the opposition and depending on the pacing of the game, which again comes down to how the likes of whoever's in there with Caicedo helps to control the game, which is why I thought Lavia was really, really good in this game. I think he helped with the tempo really nicely. But this is a good system to help have somebody like a Lavia, a Wharton and Enzo in there with Caicedo, because you have these sort of reference points as a back 5 behind them, and I really, really liked that idea. Now again, back to the idea of how we shift between shapes. This is what I was talking about, where Lavia has technically dropped a little bit deeper, and you could call that a 4, Caicedo in there as a 1, and then you actually had João Pedro, and again, this is something that João Pedro or Cole Palmer can do from this position, is if Caicedo's sort of in here on his own and Lavia's dropped deep, Pedro can drop deep to make it a 4-2-4, Welbeck can go over Palmer, Neto like this, as you can see, basically a 4-2-4, if you connect Caicedo and Pedro, who's dropping deep to show for the ball, which is going to help to drag some players out, which is where Palestra now makes that run into that channel. And he's somebody that's just so important in terms of giving us that verticality when teams are trying to step onto us. Because as you can see, AC Milan are quite high. There's a good amount of space in behind to be hit. And that's something Palestra can give you. And I think that that's something that's really, really good in terms of making us unpredictable, as Xabi Alonso said, because we go between a back 3 and a back 4 in the build-up. Even at times, you can have the 2 centre-backs as a 2 at times, and you have like a 2-3 build-up, or even just a 2-2 build-up. There's so many different variations we've already seen in pre-season, and that's what Xabi Alonso is trying to build. If you go back and watch a video from a few days ago where I'm talking about different stimulus, and the idea that Xabi Alonso is trying to teach all of these different ideas so that players understand why they're making the movements, if they should make the movements, and the timings of them. These are all important things. So I think that that's something that's really, really important that Xabi Alonso's been trying to teach. Again, you can see from goal kicks, especially we would essentially have, now I'll show it again in a second, but you'd have, again, these references where João Pedro, Welbeck and Cole are ready to jump onto the sort of back 3, and then Lavia and Caicedo can jump with the double pivot, and then that leaves them 5v5 behind the ball, Neto and Palestra, as we saw earlier. Is this the one from goal kicks? No, this is, again, just sort of showing. This is where I was talking about earlier, where Cole is more of a central player, and this is kind of more of a 3-2-1-4 off the on the ball. And what this means, and what's interesting about this, is João Pedro and Welbeck have rotated, and again, this is when it comes to those sort of being unpredictable movements, and I've spoke about this a lot in terms of what Xabi Alonso will want from this attacking unit. No matter who this front three is, Pedro, Welbeck, Palmer, the idea is for them to be really interchangeable, and somebody drops, somebody can pin, and multiple can drop, because then you've got these wingers who can make runs on the outside, or make those inside runs if these players are lured out in here. And having someone like Palestra, like I said earlier, who can attack those spaces is really, really important. But having, again, so you've got pivot players who can play between them. One can drop in, they can stay really connected as a 2 and sort of keep it as a back 3 for a 3-2. These are all really, really important things to drag opposition presses around. Now, this was just a picture that I took earlier, and this was just an example of how we were pressing from goal kicks. Palmer and Pedro would sort of jump onto, so these are kind of the outside. These aren't the strikers, because Welbeck was the striker. They would step onto the 2 central defenders here and here. Then Welbeck was kind of covering the secondary pivot player, whilst Lavia stepped up. This then meant that Palestra and Neto could both jump up onto these players without leaving an overload behind the ball, because if Casado was jumping up and Welbeck was sort of in here, then it would mean that one of these players has to stay a bit deeper, which you probably don't want defensively. What you would prefer is Hato to stay man-to-man, Fofana to stay man-to-man, Chempong to stay man-to-man, and then Casado is in there as that fourth man-to-man player. And this was, again, a really, really nice sort of profiling way of doing things for the man-to-man press, which I quite liked. Now, again, these are just some pictures that will come up that we've already explained in terms of the sitting in a 3-2-5 block, the way that these wide centre-backs can be aggressive, the way that it protects these sort of central players who can jump up as well. And again, just the screening job of these 3 in here, which is really, really good, and something that we need to see them improve upon a little bit. But with time, I think that those roles, especially someone like Palmer, is actually quite a clever presser in terms of his angling and like how he tries to stop that progression into the pivot. So I do like that. This is just an example I said about earlier. Welbeck in here, Lavia in here, and again you got Pedro and Palmer at the front end. And then you got Neto and Palestra jumping onto the wide men, the fullbacks in this case. And now we're going to just talk about a few of the goals just to end off with. Hopefully this has made a bit of sense in terms of how we're shifting between different shapes. And the biggest difference, like I said, is more so the out of possession. What block are you going to sit in? If you're going to sit in a 4-4-2 block and the 4-4-2 hybrid press that we've been using recently, then of course that is more of a 4-2-3-1. However, with the block that we were using in this game, you can kind of label it more of a back 5, purely because the block we were using off the ball. In terms of in-possession ideas and principles, it's rarely going to matter. So in terms of the system that we're using, I would more so focus on how we look off the ball to determine whether we're in a back 5 or a back 4. Because again, if we were pressing in this game in a, let's say we was in that 4-4-2, this could have easily been framed as a 4-2-3-1. Pedro on the left, Palmer in the 10, Welbeck up front, Neto on the right. Because on the ball, that was how it looked, right? It was Neto out wide, Palmer would come over here, Pedro would come in off the left. Imagine this is someone like Morgan Rogers coming in off the left, and then your left back provides the width, and then it still creates a 3-2-5 or a 3-2-4-1 off the ball, on the ball, sorry. The difference is that, of course, if we were pressing in a 4-4-2 in this shape, is that would be your back 4 with Palestra, Hato, Fofana, and a Chempong, which again could work. Like Hato can play left centre back, Palestra can play left back, a Chempong can play right back. You'd have your double pivot with Lavia and Casado off the ball. The difference would be that Pedro would be your left mid, Neto would be your right mid, and then you'd have Palmer and Welbeck as a front 2. So that would be the only difference. That's why it's so important, because this team can play in different shapes in multiple ways, because you're using a winger as a wing back to cover in this area. And we saw that from Kenda when he come on the pitch. And we also saw from Jackson the way that him and Pedro can do a similar thing to what Welbeck and Pedro were doing earlier, when I showed the picture of João Pedro being higher and Jackson being a bit deeper. We're actually going to do a separate video for Nicholas Jackson tomorrow, because I think it's really important we talk about him in detail, because I think he's really shown a lot in the minimal minutes he's actually had of how important he can be to this team, how he can link with the other players. We already know his connection with Palmer, but I think also with João Pedro, something that will work extremely, extremely well. And I think he just makes the whole attack click. And especially when we've got so many players now, with João Pedro being a top-end scorer, showing that last season. Palmer's always going to have goals in him. Palestra, I think, is going to add so much more in terms of going forward as well. And Esteval and Kenda. And there's so many players we could talk about in that light. I think Nicholas Jackson is really important. Now, just to look at the goals, the set pieces aside, we're going to talk about in a second. This goal was just a stereotypical, really, really nice goal that I think we'll see quite a few of these types this season. Because what you've got is you've got that player, whether that be Neto again, it could be Kenda, it could be Esteval, providing that in-swinging cross. Now, what I really like is the fact we've got that rest defence behind the ball, as we've spoken about through the whole of pre-season. It is Hato being the more passive, but joining to make a 3 here with Lavia and Caicedo. And then behind the ball, you'll have Fofana and a Chempong. So it's basically a 2-3 rest defence. And then you've got your front 5. Neto here. Palmer is that inside option, connecting the two. And then Caicedo is technically an option to circulate and come outside if you was to form a little triangle on that side. But Neto putting that ball into the box. You've got a striker here, which is brilliant. This is why I really like João Pedro in this position. And that's probably been my favourite part about João Pedro in this position, is the fact that he can crash the box as a secondary man, and there's a little bit of attention taken away from him. If you have the likes of Jackson, Welbeck, and even Omega in there with João Pedro, he can get goals like this, where he's that secondary attacker into the box and arriving. And even more so now, yes, Marc Cucurella used to do this really, really well, and he did score goals from this, and he was a nuisance. But Palestra, with his frame and his strength and physicality, the way he uses his arms to battle players off, he's going to be a nuisance attacking that back post as well. So if you can find these sort of 3v3 moments here with 2 strikers, or like again a 10, but a João Pedro type of 10, where it's a physical, even a Morgan Rogers in this situation has got a lot of frame, 6'2", and he's got that physicality. If we've got a striker, Morgan Rogers and Palestra on this side of the pitch, like again, João Pedro, Morgan Rogers, Palestra, or João Pedro, Omega, Palestra, whoever it may be. That's a good 3v3 to be finding at the back post in terms of physicality and disruption, especially then if somebody else like Palmer can come and drift over and pick up the scraps, Hato ready to pounce, Lavia and Caicedo all ready to pounce to sustain pressure as well. This was a really, really nice goal. It was a bit of a scrappy one with the finish, but again, I like how it ended up in a goal with this sort of movement, a 3v3 at the back post. I did really enjoy that. Again, just a few examples of the press in the second half. Palmer, Welbeck, João Pedro with their references. Same with Lavia and Caicedo with who they're following. And then you've got Hato jumping out, Palestra jumping out. And the reason I highlighted this play is because someone like Lacroix, this is his bread and butter in terms of defending that channel running behind. He did it a lot with Crystal Palace if somebody stepped out, whether it be, say, a Gurhey or a Chris Richards. And again, Mitchell is sort of holding a little bit higher as well. Lacroix would defend that depth really, really nicely, and I think that's something he'll be really good at as a central centre-back in this sort of system. Also, just to mention it, though, I do think Wes was actually quite good, and I do think Wes is somebody that people will be surprised about because a lot of people wanted him sold. But he just does fit what Alonso wants to do in terms of having somebody that can step out of the back line, be aggressive, but also recover with pace into the channel. I do think Wes will surprise a few people this season in the amount that he is used, whether that be in a back 3 or a back 4. Now, yes, this is a Lacroix. It should still be Lacroix and Colwill, but don't be surprised if Wes is fighting for that spot. Just to finish off with, the set pieces was really, really nice to see. This one especially, I love the fact that there's just this block going on here to free up this space for Caicedo to arrive, and the volley that he did was unbelievable. But again, these blocking actions, you know that they're trying to basically just keep the AC Milan players within this yellow quadrant that I've basically made, which gives the space at the edge of the box for Caicedo to arrive and just provide this ridiculous Travella volley, which was just nuts. And again, this is just another example of the shape with the 3 blocking in here, the 2 pivot, and this is a more zonal version of that shape where you can see these 2 are being more zonal. Caicedo is still ready if this ball goes into here, but again, this is a good way of protecting a Fernandez, a Wharton, a Lavia, who can help on the ball. And again, here's the references for them to then jump out and apply pressure. That being said, I still would like an Alex Scott as an addition, but I think that if you're going to have someone like a Lavia or Enzo Fernandez in here, I think that this is the best shape to maximise them and protect them whilst getting the most out of them in possession, and then still having, again, enough protection to warrant them being in the team out of possession as well. So that is my main thoughts of that game. But again, this is something that I just wanted to show because I think it's a great quote, and I think that if you've watched the last sort of 5 or 6 videos on the channel, we've been talking about this sort of shape-shifting idea that Xabi Alonso has to go between lots of different shapes with lots of different profiles. And when you think about the signings of Palestra, Lacroix, Rodgers, Chavaria, who have I missed? I think there's another one that I'm missing. Welbeck, Henderson are more so to do with less to do with versatility than they are to do with responsibility and raising the standards. But especially Palestra, Rodgers, Lacroix, and Chavaria, I think that they give you a lot of really, really nice interchangeability and versatility with their tactical understanding and positional understanding, etc., etc. So that's really important. And again, we spoke about Hato, James, all these hybrid profiles, Joshua Chempong, that we already have, which is brilliant. Let me know any thoughts you have. Tomorrow, we will be back with a Nicholas Jackson video. It'll probably be more of an attacking video, like to do with the attack, but it's going to be heavily through the lens of Nicholas Jackson. So do not miss that. Please do drop a like, subscribe, comment, leave all your questions about the games and tactics, and I'll try and get to them in the comment sections. Keep up the support because the channel has been popping recently. We've been getting 10k in most videos in the last sort of month or so. So that has been very, very, very good and much appreciated. So yeah, drop a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll see you guys in the next one.